Crystal of Wisdom presents, A High Mind Used for Low Purposes is Despicable.
Dear friends, in the previous story I told you about the importance of knowledge and also about the importance of friends or servants who have different knowledge. With their help, a man becomes even wiser and richer. Joint knowledge directed to one goal makes it maximally achievable. And if the goal is good, it is wonderful. But unfortunately, sometimes it happens that knowledge is aimed at creating evil. And with the help of the mind, evil becomes even more sophisticated. It's much harder to recognize it in this form. That's what my next story is about. Listen carefully. This story took place long ago, many centuries, maybe even millennia ago. It happened in one small town. This town was located in a very beautiful place among high mountains and green meadows. Ordinary people lived in this town. They were as peaceful and beautiful as the nature around them. Some worked in the fields, orchards and vineyards. Others herded livestock. Others spun yarn and wove cloth. Potters made crockery, and blacksmiths forged tools and household utensils. So they had plenty of everything. They rejoiced in life, praised the sun, respected the moon, and thanked nature for the rain sent to them from heaven. People were happy and kind and therefore did not think about the fact that somewhere far away there might be other cities where people lived worse than them, and somewhere better. They were not interested in that. After all, everything was good for them, and that was their happiness. And one day, there were strangers passing along the road through this city. They were dressed in dark and long traveling cloaks with hoods on their heads and looked like pilgrims. The strangers entered the town. The townspeople noticed the strange travelers. In their kindness, they offered the strangers food and rest. The strangers thanked the townspeople with a kind word. When the strangers had rested, they told the townspeople that it was very beautiful. They said that they had traveled for a long time through distant lands and had seen different cities and different people, but they had never seen such a beautiful nature and such a wonderful city. The townspeople were pleased to hear such words from the strangers. Then the strangers began to tell the townspeople that somewhere far away there are very strange and interesting lands and people. Somewhere very far away there are huge sandy deserts where there is absolutely no water and it is always very hot. And somewhere there are huge snowy deserts where it is always very cold. Somewhere there are huge seas and shoreless oceans. Somewhere there are people who walk on coals of fire. And somewhere there are people who walk on water. The townspeople liked their stories very much. They mesmerized, listened, and listened to the stories of the strangers. The long stories dragged on until late in the evening. The strangers were about to leave, but the kind townspeople suggested that they stay in town for the night and continue their journey the next day. The strangers readily agreed. In the morning, the strangers began to show the townspeople amazing tricks. Objects appeared and disappeared in their hands. Suddenly, fire lit up in their hands, which they swallowed. And many more different and amazing tricks. The townspeople looked at the tricks with great amazement. So another day passed, and again the strangers were asked to stay overnight in the town. The strangers stayed again. On the third day, it turned out that one of the strangers could tell fortunes and predict fate. He could also give advice on what to do in any given life situation. The enchanted townspeople crowded to learn about their fate or to get life advice. The strangers easily gave advice and explained the reasons for this or that event in the lives of the townspeople. But sometimes, according to the strangers, neighbors and fellow citizens turned out to be the culprits of some unpleasant events. And as a result, some people began to look at their fellow citizens with resentment. People began to forget about their happiness. They had new feelings, resentment, envy, malice, which were not familiar to them before. And to solve unexpected problems, people again went to the strangers for advice. This continued for several more days. The trust in the strangers grew into a need. The strangers were offered to stay in the city a little longer. The strangers said that in that case they needed a separate house. Having received the consent of the townspeople, the strangers pointed out a place on the edge of the town where they would like to have their own house. People gladly agreed, and very soon, through the efforts of all the townspeople, a new house was built at the specified place. The strangers thanked the kind townspeople and settled in the house. On the door of the new house, the strangers painted a strange sign. So the strangers settled in the city. Every day, people went to the strangers for advice, and in the evenings they listened to amazing stories. But it turned out that the strangers did not do all this for free, and that they had to pay for their services. The enchanted townspeople did not pay much attention to this condition. But now they weren't going to the strangers empty-handed. Everyone shared with them what they could. By that time, the townspeople had somehow stopped feeling happy. Somehow, they stopped being kind to each other. Discord and even enmity appeared. One day, the townspeople asked the strangers to tell them where they got such knowledge and what the sign they drew on the door of their house meant. Then the strangers asked the townspeople, "Who is your God?" The townspeople didn't even understand the question. Who is God? Why do they need him? The sun shines from the sky during the day and the moon at night, and everything they have was achieved by their labor and nothing else. They didn't understand anything. Then the strangers told them that their knowledge, their amazing abilities, had been given to them by their God, and their great God lives high in the sky. He has a name. But his name must not be spoken to anyone, so as not to anger God. And only with him can one find true happiness and serenity, and if the townspeople want it, the strangers can teach them how to find it. But it can't be achieved quickly. It takes long, long days. The townspeople were willing to do anything. They dreamed of lost happiness. It seemed to them that only these amazing strangers with their amazing God could give them happiness and serenity. The strangers told the townspeople that starting the next day, all the people of the town should come to their house at the appointed time to eulogize their God and do whatever the strangers told them to do in order to reach the favor of their heavenly God. And then, one day, their God would be able to grant the most worthy of them great happiness and serenity. Every day the townspeople came to the stranger's house and eulogized their God. And every day they brought gifts to the strangers. And every day the strangers performed strange rituals. Days passed, and then months. During this time, the strangers visited neighboring cities, and there the result of their stay was exactly the same. And in other cities, people began to eulogize their God and believe in miracles. So a year passed, but strangely enough, the life of people did not become better. They never became happy. At the same time, the strangers themselves lived better and better. In every city they had a rich house and everything they had in plenty. Now the best of all lived the strangers, who so skillfully manipulated people using their abilities. After a while, the strangers told the people that they had received news that God was angry with people. And when he is angry, he can send great calamities, crop failures, famine, and disease to the earth. And in order to please God, the inhabitants of each city will have to give the most beautiful unmarried girl to the strangers on the appointed day. And if the girl does not please God, she will have to be sacrificed to God. Woe befell the already unhappy people. No one wanted to give up their daughter, but they were even more afraid of the promised curses. At that time, a wanderer came into town. He was a pre-faced and fair-haired young man. He had kind eyes, and it could seem that this man was glowing with goodness and optimism. As he entered the town, he saw the grief-stricken people. He tried to ask the townspeople what the cause of their great grief was, but no one wanted to tell him. They were all afraid of the curses of God promised by the strangers. But gradually, word by word, the fair-haired wanderer learned from the townspeople about everything that had happened to them. The wanderer was clever enough to understand the deception at once. He tried to tell the truth to the people, but they refused to listen and believe him. It cost the wanderer a lot of work to convince the townspeople that they had been deceived, to convince them that their minds had been insidiously and skillfully captured by the strangers. But the people could not believe him. People told the wanderer that there was a God in heaven, and he was very angry with people and threatened to destroy them, and they wanted to wait for God to have mercy on them and give them happiness. Then the fair-haired wanderer told people that God created the earth and all living things on it, including people. And just as a father cannot be constantly angry with his children just because of what they are, so God can't just be angry at people. God loves all people. But people still didn't believe him. They thought the fair-haired wanderer was just trying to comfort and reassure them. And so the appointed day came. The people made their choice and prepared to give the most beautiful girl to the strangers. Then the fair-haired wanderer told the people that if they did not give the girl and stopped coming to the stranger's house and eulogize their God, there would be no grief. And to prove his words, he offered his life as a pledge. If the promised curses happened, the townspeople could do anything to him. People were very surprised at such an act. Some people decided to believe the fair-haired wanderer. Others were afraid to believe him even under such conditions, considering him a madman. After a long discussion, the people decided to believe him and did not give the strangers the girl and did not come to the stranger's house to eulogize their God. When the strangers heard about it, they became very angry. They threatened the people with trouble and curses that would happen soon. The townspeople lay in wait. They looked at the fair-haired wanderer, ready to tear him apart, but nothing happened. A day passed. The strangers again became very angry and threatened the people with more trouble and curses. The people looked at the fair-haired wanderer. On his face was complete calmness, and there was not a drop of fear. The people decided to wait a little longer, and the next day nothing happened. The bright sun shone serenely in the deep blue sky, and nothing happened. The lingering expectation of great grief brought people together. They began to remember how they used to live, how kind and friendly they were, and the promised calamities never happened to people. And then people realized how cunningly and insidiously the strangers deceived them. The townspeople gathered and banished these strangers from their town, and then they did the same in other cities. After that, people thanked the fair-haired wanderer and offered him to stay in their town. But the fair-haired wanderer said that his vocation was to help different people. So he went on his way, and the townspeople began to live as they had lived before, and they realized that their happiness was only in their hands. This is how it can happen when knowledge is directed to create evil, and with the help of the mind, evil becomes even more elaborated. It's much harder to recognize it in this form. Remember, friends, this wisdom. A high mind used for low purposes is despicable.
If you liked the video, give it a like.